Dawn broke over the wild, tangled lands of eastern Britannia with a hush that was almost reverent. The sky, still bruised with the last purples of night, slowly bled into shades of molten gold. Mist curled low over the heather, thick and cold, shrouding the world in secrecy. Every blade of grass was tipped with dew, tiny orbs that caught the first light and shimmered like 1,000 tiny stars. The air tasted of earth and wood smoke, a sharp tang that stung the nose and filled the lungs with the promise of another hard day. Boudicca stood barefoot on the threshold of her family's roundhouse, toes curled against the packed clay floor, feeling the chill seep up through her soles. Her hair, tangled and copper bright, tumbled down her back in wild knots. She drew her cloak tighter around her shoulders, the heavy wool rough against her skin, still carrying the musky scent of sheep and smoke. The fire inside the house had burned low, and the warmth clung to her like a memory she couldn't quite hold on to. The village was stirring somewhere nearby. A child's laughter rang out, sharp and high, quickly hushed by a mother's warning. The clatter of wooden buckets, the lowing of cattle behind a wattle fence, the rhythmic thud of a pestle grinding grain. Boudicca closed her eyes and let the sounds wash over her, grounding her in the life she knew above. A raven croaked from the roof beam, its black eyes catching the light. A dark omen, some would say, but to Boudicca, the raven was kin, a watcher on the wind. She inhaled deeply, the cold air biting at her teeth, and tasted the world. The peat fires smoldering in distant huts, the sweet rot of fallen leaves, the faint tang of the sea far to the east. Smoke curled from the thatched roofs, drifting upward to tangle with the mist. The scent of roasting barley mingled with the sharper notes of fresh-cut wood and damp earth, filling her nose, grounding her in the moment. Inside, her mother moved quietly, stirring the embers and humming a song older than the stones beneath their feet. Boudicca heard the scrape of a ladle against the iron pot, the soft splash as oat porridge was poured into a wooden bowl. Her stomach rumbled, but she stayed where she was, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun threatened to break free. She pressed her palm against the rough wood of the doorframe, feeling the grooves worn by generations of hands, mothers, fathers, warriors, children. The tribe's mark was carved there, a spiral knot, its edges smoothed by time. She traced it with her thumb, thinking of all who had come before, all who had stood watch over this patch of land. Boudicca's heart was restless. She could feel it thudding in her chest, wild and insistent, like a drum beat in the darkness. Today she was 15 summers old, a woman grown, at least by the reckoning of her people. Yet she felt caught between worlds, too old for childish games, too young for the burdens she sensed gathering on the horizon. She wondered, not for the first time, what fate had in store for her. The old stories whispered that the gods watched over the Iceni, that the land itself was alive with spirits, ancient, capricious, hungry for sacrifice. She had seen the druids gather at the edge of the sacred grove, their robes white as bone, their chants rising like smoke into the night. She had felt the weight of their eyes upon her, as if they could see straight through to the marrow of her bones. Boudicca! Her mother's voice, soft but edged with warning, come inside before your feet freeze to the earth. She turned, the hem of her cloak brushing the frost-rimed threshold, and stepped back into the smoky warmth of the roundhouse. The world outside faded to a dull, gray blur, but the wildness of it still sang in her blood. As she sat cross-legged by the fire, cradling the steaming bowl in her hands, Boudicca's thoughts churned like the river after a storm. She could not shake the feeling that her life was about to change, that the peace of her childhood was slipping away like mist under the rising sun. She glanced at her mother, her strong, weathered hands, the silver threads in her hair, the quiet set of her jaw. There was strength there, and sorrow too. Boudicca wondered what secrets her mother carried, what hopes and fears she hid behind her calm eyes. Outside, the raven croaked again, louder this time, and Boudicca shivered. The world was waking, and she, a daughter of the wolf, would have to find her place in it. The sun had climbed higher now, burning away the last of the mist and painting the world in sharp relief. Boudicca strode across the village green, her feet sinking into the damp grass. She wore her best tunic, dyed a deep indigo with woad and edged in bright red thread. The fabric scratched her skin, but she wore it proudly, a badge of her family standing around her waist. A leather belt cinched tight, hung with a small bronze dagger, a gift from her father the previous winter. Children darted past her, shrieking with laughter, their faces streaked with mud. Boudicca smiled at them, remembering when she too had run wild, climbing trees and chasing chickens until her mother's sharp cry summoned her home. Now the children looked at her with a mixture of awe and wariness. She was taller than most of the men, her shoulders broad, her arms strong from hauling water and chopping wood. Some whispered that she had the blood of wolves in her veins, that the gods had marked her for something great or terrible. She found her father near the edge of the village, where the land sloped down to a shallow stream. Prasutagus, chieftain of the Iceni, stood with two other men, his brother Caradoc and the druid Era. Their voices were low, urgent, their faces drawn tight with worry. Boudicca hesitated, then approached, her footsteps muffled by the thick grass. The men fell silent as she drew near, but Era nodded in greeting, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Daughter," Prasutagus said, his voice rough as gravel. He was a big man, his hair streaked with gray, his beard thick and tangled. His cloak was pinned with a bronze brooch in the shape of a horse, a symbol of the Iceni's power and pride. "Father," Boudicca replied, bowing her head in respect. Caradoc shot her a look, half amusement, half challenge. "Up early, little wolf?" Boudicca met his gaze, unblinking. "The world doesn't wait for those who sleep." Caradoc snorted, but there was affection in his eyes. He clapped her on the shoulder, his hand rough and warm. "That's the spirit." Era's gaze lingered on Boudicca, searching her face for something unspoken. The druid was older than the hills, it seemed, her hair white as snow, her skin creased by years of wind and sun. She wore a robe of undyed wool, a necklace of carved bone, and amber resting against her chest. "The omens are troubled," Era said, her voice soft but carrying. "The Romans grow bolder. Their roads cut through the land like wounds that will not heal." Boudicca felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had heard the stories, the legions marching in their iron armor, their shields gleaming like the scales of some monstrous beast. The Romans had come to Britannia years before, driving their standards deep into the earth, claiming it as their own. Some tribes had fought, others had bent the knee. The Iceni, for now, kept a fragile peace, but everyone knew it could not last. Prasutagis's jaw tightened. "We will not yield, not while I draw breath." Era shook her head. "Strength alone will not save us, chieftain. The gods demand sacrifice. The land is restless." Boudicca's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to speak, to demand answers, but she held her tongue. Instead, she watched her father, searching his face for some sign of certainty. Prasutagus turned to her, his eyes softening. "Walk with me, Boudicca." They left the others behind, moving along the stream's edge. The water sparkled in the sunlight, cold and clear, carrying the scents of moss and wet stone. Birds flitted through the reeds, their songs weaving through the air. Boudicca matched her father's stride, her cloak swirling around her ankles. "Do you remember the first time you saw a Roman?" Prasutagus asked, his voice low. Boudicca nodded. "I was a child. He rode through the village with his men, armor shining. Everyone stopped to stare." Her father grunted, "They want us to be afraid. They want us to forget who we are." The morning mist clung to the low, rolling hills of eastern Britannia, veiling the world in a pale, trembling light. Dew shimmered like 1,000 tiny jewels on the bristling heather, each droplet trembling as the wind, sharp with the scent of distant rain and turned earth, swept across the land. The air was cool, almost biting, with the taste of iron and wood smoke drifting from the Iceni encampment. Crows called from the bare branches overhead, their voices harsh and insistent, echoing through the gray hush that lay over the waking world. Boudicca stood alone at the edge of the village, where the wild grass grew tall and the earth was soft beneath her bare feet. Her long copper hair was unbound, spilling over her shoulders in tangled waves that caught the morning's dampness. She drew her cloak tighter around her, the rough wool scratching her skin. The deep indigo dye faded, but still vibrant against the muted tones of the land. The weight of the heavy silver torque at her throat, a sign of her noble birth, pressed cold and solid against her collarbone. She inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the raw, living scent of her home. Peat smoke, wet moss, the faint tang of horse sweat and leather, and beneath it all, the metallic promise of rain. Her eyes, green and fierce as a hawk's, swept the horizon far off. The Roman road cut a pale scar through the fields, its unnatural straightness an affront to the wild, meandering paths of her people. Even now, she could sense the pressure of Rome at the edges of her world, a silent, waiting threat. Boudicca's muscles ached from a restless night. She had slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of burning villages and the clash of iron. In her mind, she saw her daughters' faces, wide-eyed and solemn, their hair braided with bright blue ribbons, and felt a pang of fierce protectiveness. She pressed a calloused hand to her belly, feeling the steady thrum of her own heartbeat, a reminder that she was alive, that she was strong. But beneath her strength was a gnawing uncertainty, a sense that the world was shifting beneath her feet. She closed her eyes and listened. The distant bleating of sheep, the rhythmic clatter of hooves on stone, the low murmur of women's voices as they prepared the morning meal, the aroma of barley porridge mingled with sweet honey, and the sharper note of wild herbs drifted on the breeze. Somewhere, a child laughed, the sound bright and fleeting. Boudicca's thoughts tumbled like stones in a river. She was no longer a girl running wild across the fields. She was wife to Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, and mother to 2 daughters. Responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, its weight more real than the cloak she wore. The Romans had come with their promises of peace and prosperity, but she had seen the hunger in their eyes, the way they measured her people's land and counted their cattle as if it already belonged to them. She remembered her father's words, spoken by the fire, on nights when the wind howled outside their roundhouse. A queen is a shield, not just a jewel. You must be fierce, Boudicca, for wolves will come for our kin. She had laughed then, tossing her hair and flexing her growing muscles, proud of the strength in her limbs. But now those words echoed in her bones, a warning and a command. She opened her eyes and watched as the mist began to lift, revealing the patchwork of fields and forests that was her kingdom. For a moment, she felt the land's pulse beneath her feet, steady and ancient, older than any empire. She was Iceni, a daughter of the wolf, a queen in waiting. And though fear gnawed at her, It could not drown the fire that burned in her chest. Boudicca turned, her cloak swirling behind her, and walked back toward the heart of the village. Each step pressed the dew into the earth, leaving a trail. The day was beginning, and with it, the endless dance of duty and defiance. As the sky brightened, she whispered a silent promise to her ancestors. Whatever comes, I will not bend. I will not break. The village was already alive with motion. The round houses, their thatched roofs beaded with moisture, clustered close together for warmth and safety. Smoke curled from the smoke holes, mingling with the scents of roasting meat and damp earth. Horses stamped and snorted in their enclosures, their coats shining chestnut and black in the early light. The clang of metal on metal rang out from the smithy, where sparks danced in the air like fireflies. Boudicca strode toward the largest roundhouse, her steps deliberate, her chin high. She passed a group of women weaving baskets, their fingers nimble and stained with willow bark. They paused in their work, glancing up with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Boudicca offered a brief, tight smile, her mind already racing ahead. Inside the roundhouse, warmth enveloped her, thick and smoky. The walls were hung with woven tapestries, spirals and wolves, horses and ravens, each one a story, a memory. Prasutagus sat near the hearth, his profile sharp in the firelight, the lines of age and worry etched deep around his eyes. He wore a cloak of dark green, embroidered with silver thread, and the heavy gold torse of a king. At his side stood Era, the tribe's chief advisor, her hair streaked with gray, her keen eyes missing nothing. She wore a simple tunic, belted at the waist, and a necklace of carved bone, each bead a symbol of wisdom earned. As Boudicca entered, Era's gaze flickered over her, searching for signs of unrest. Prasutagus looked up and smiled, the warmth in his eyes softening the stern set of his mouth. "You walk the fields early, my queen," he said, his voice low and rough as gravel. "What do you see in the mist?" Boudicca hesitated, then answered, "I see Rome waiting beyond the trees. I see our people, strong but wary, and I see a storm gathering, though the sky is clear." Era snorted softly. "You always were one for omens, Boudicca, but the only storm I see is the one in your eyes." She moved closer, her footsteps silent on the packed earth floor. "The Romans come, yes, but they bring trade, coin, new tools, even wine. We have kept our autonomy longer than most." Prasutagus's hand found Boudicca's, rough fingers entwining with hers. Era is right in part. The Romans are not all wolves. Their governor, Paulinus, sends envoys with gifts, olive oil, glass beads, bolts of dyed cloth. They say we are allies, not subjects. Boudicca's lips tightened. Allies do not demand tribute. Allies do not send tax collectors who trample our fields and count our cattle as if they are theirs already. She pulled her hand free, pacing before the fire. The animal skins beneath her feet were soft, but she longed for the solid feel of earth and grass. Era's eyes narrowed. Careful, Boudicca. You are queen, but you are also the king's wife. The Romans respect strength, but they punish defiance. A silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the fire. The air in the roundhouse grew heavy, thick with the scent of burning peat and the unspoken weight of fear. Prasutagus cleared his throat, his voice gentler now. We must be wise. The Iceni are proud, but we are not so many. Rome's legions are endless, their swords sharp. I have negotiated for our independence. Our daughters will inherit a kingdom, not a graveyard. Boudicca turned to face him, her eyes blazing. And what will be left for them to inherit if we give away our freedom piece by piece? Today, it is taxes and tribute. Tomorrow, it will be our land, our gods, our very names. Era stepped between them, her hands raised. Enough! We cannot change the tide by shouting at the sea. We must find a way to bend without breaking. Boudicca glared at her, then softened, seeing the lines of exhaustion etched deep in Era's face. I know you mean well, old friend, but I cannot help what I feel. I see the fear in our people's eyes. The Romans bring gifts, yes, but they bring chains as well. Prasutagus stood, his cloak swirling around him, and crossed to Boudicca. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You are the fire that keeps this tribe alive. But sometimes, fire must be banked, not let loose. Promise me you will be cautious. She searched his face, seeing the love and worry tangled there. I promise to be wise, but I will not be silent if our people are threatened. The dawn that broke over the Iceni lands was a gray, sullen thing, shrouded in mist and the scent of damp earth. The sky, once a tapestry of bold colors, now hung low and colorless, a heavy woolen cloak pressing down upon the world. The fields, once vibrant with the gold of ripening barley and the green of wild grass, looked battered and bruised under the uncertain light. The air was thick with the tang of wood smoke and the faint, bitter trace of burnt thatch, a reminder of fires that had licked through the village in the night, devouring what little peace remained. Boudicca stood alone at the edge of the settlement, her boots half sunk in the churned, muddy ground. The chill of the morning seemed to seep straight through the thick wool of her cloak, prickling along her skin. She drew the rough fabric tighter around her shoulders, feeling the weight of it, a meager shield against the cold that had settled not just on the land, but deep in her bones. The silence was uneasy, broken only by the distant caw of a crow, and the low, uncertain murmurs of her people as they moved about the ruins of their homes. The familiar sense of her world, peat smoke, wild heather, the sweet tang of fermenting mead, were overpowered by the stench of charred timber and the coppery undertone of spilled blood. Each breath was an effort, as if the very air rebelled at what had happened. She let her gaze drift over the battered huts, their reed roofs blackened and sagging, the wooden palisades splintered and useless. Every corner of this place was etched into her memory. The stone altar where she had knelt as a girl to offer gifts to the goddess Andraste, the old yew tree whose roots tangled beneath the chieftain's hall, the trampled wildflowers that once marked the path to her daughter's sleeping place. Now, all of it was changed, scarred, violated, lost. Boudicca's hands curled into fists at her sides. The skin across her knuckles was raw, scraped by the rough caress of Roman armor. Bruises bloomed along her arms and shoulders, ugly marks beneath the faded blue woad that still traced the patterns of her tribe. She could feel every ache, every cut, every humiliation burning in her flesh, but it was nothing compared to what pressed on her heart. She closed her eyes just for a moment, letting the wind tug at her tangled copper hair. Her mind reeled, replaying the last night with a cruel clarity. The faces of her daughters, streaked with tears and dirt. The sneering Roman centurion, his voice thick with contempt, as he read out the decree, the laughter of soldiers as they tore her dignity away as easily as they stripped the ornaments from her wrists. The memory was a brand pressed to her soul. How did it come to this, she wondered? The Romans had promised safety. Prasutagus had trusted their words, left half his kingdom to Rome, hoping for peace. And now he was gone, his body cold and still, and the world he had tried to protect was in ruins. Boudicca's breath shuddered in her chest. She could taste the bitterness of betrayal, sharp as nettles on her tongue. She had been a queen, a wife, a mother. Now she was something else, a vessel for rage, for shame, for a grief so deep it threatened to drown her. Yet beneath it all, something fierce and unbroken smoldered. The Romans could take her husband, her home, her pride, but they could not take the fire that burned in her blood, not unless she let them. A sudden gust whipped across the fields, stirring the ashes and sending a shiver through the grass. Boudicca opened her eyes. The world before her was battered, but not dead. Not yet. She would not let it end this way. Not with chains and ashes, not while she still drew breath. A brittle hush had settled over the Iceni camp, broken only by the restless movement of survivors. Boudicca turned, her boots squelching in the mud, and strode toward the chieftain's hall. What remained of it? The great doors hung askew, one split clean through by an axe. Inside, the air was thick with the sour tang of fear, and the musk of too many bodies crowded into too small a space. Her daughters huddled near the embers of the central hearth. Isolde, the elder, was wrapped in a patched blanket, her dark eyes wide and haunted. Rhiannon, smaller but fierce, sat with her knees drawn to her chest, her hair a tangled veil hiding her face. The sisters leaned into each other, silent, but for the occasional sniffle. Boudicca knelt beside them, her knees creaking on the rough floor. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Isolde's cheek. The girl flinched, just a fraction, but Boudicca felt the sting as if it were a slap. "Mother," Isolde whispered, her voice thin. "I am here," Boudicca said, forcing strength into her tone. "I will not let them harm you again." Rhiannon's small hand found her mother's. "They said we were nothing," she choked. "They called us slaves." Boudicca's jaw clenched. She squeezed her daughter's hand, careful not to let her own pain show. "You are not slaves. You are daughters of the Iceni blood, of kings and queens. Don't let their words take that from you." A shadow fell across the doorway. Old Branwen, the tribe's healer, shuffled in, her arms laden with bundles of herbs and strips of linen. The sharp scent of yarrow and sage filled the air, mingling with the smoke. "Boudicca," Branwen murmured, her voice rough as gravel. "The council waits." Boudicca stood, her back stiffening. "Let them wait a moment longer," she said, her eyes never leaving her daughter's. "My place is here." Branwen hesitated, then knelt beside the girls, pressing a warm hand to Rhiannon's brow. "The gods see all, child," she whispered. "They do not forget." Isolde's lips trembled, but did they see what happened to father? Branwen's lined face softened. "He walks in the other world now, among the honored dead. He watches over you still." Boudicca swallowed hard, her throat thick with unshed tears. She turned, her cloak swirling, and strode toward the council chamber, a small side room hastily cleared of debris. As she entered, the voices of the elders stilled. 3 men sat around the battered oak table. Eira, the silver-haired matriarch of the neighboring Trinovantes. Caradoc, her cousin, his hands stained with blood from tending the wounded. And Lucius, the Roman tax collector, his fine cloak now smeared with mud, and fear. Eira's eyes were sharp, her silver hair braided with scraps of blue cloth. "Boudicca," she greeted, gesturing to the empty seat. "We must speak plainly." Boudicca sat, her fists clenched beneath the table. "Then let us speak." Caradoc leaned forward, his voice raw. "The Romans have broken faith. They took Prasutagus' lands, flogged you, shamed your daughters. They mean to make us slaves in our own home." Lucius shifted, his pale face drawn. "It was not my wish." "Your wish?" Boudicca's voice was a whip crack. "You stood by while they tore my children from my arms." Lucius's gaze dropped. "I am a servant of Rome. I obey orders." "Orders?" Caradoc spat. "To strip us of everything. To treat our queen like a criminal." Eira's voice cut through the rising anger. "We must decide what comes next, submission or resistance." A tense silence fell. The fire snapped, sending sparks up the smoke-stained chimney. Boudicca's mind raced. She watched Lucius, noting the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted to the door, as if longing to flee. She saw Caradoc's knuckles white on the table, Era's face carved with worry and pride. Each of them was broken in their own way, by fear, by anger, by the weight of what had been lost. She drew a slow breath, tasting the acrid smoke, the metallic tang of her own rising fury. "We cannot submit," she said at last, her voice low but steady. "If we bow now, there will be no end. Today it is my family. Tomorrow it will be yours." Era nodded, her eyes shining. "But our warriors are scattered. The Romans have horses, armor, discipline." Boudicca met her gaze. "We have the land, the gods, our people's wrath. Let that be our armor." Lucius shifted again, sweat beading on his brow. "The governor will send more troops. If you rebel, Rome will not show mercy." Caradoc's lips twisted. The morning sky hangs low and bruised, thick with the scent of rain and distant wood smoke. Mist curls along the ground in pale, ghostly ribbons, clinging to the trampled grass and the splintered remains of what was once the heart of the Iceni. Every breath Boudicca draws tastes of damp earth and ashes, sharp as grief on her tongue. The air is heavy, pressing against her skin, seeping into the wool of her dyed cloak, a deep blue, now stained and torn at the hem. The edges of her linen tunic scratch against her thighs, gritty with the dust of ruin. She stands barefoot on the cold, uneven soil, toes sinking into mud where the rain has turned the fields to mire around her. The land is wounded. The charred bones of huts jut from blackened earth like broken teeth, smoke still curling from the smoldering piles. The wind carries the acrid tang of burnt thatch and the faint metallic smell of blood. A memory more than a presence, but it lingers, stubborn as sorrow. Somewhere a raven croaks, its wings beating the air with the sound of dry leather. The tribe's sacred oak, once towering and proud, is now split and scorched, its branches reaching skyward in mute accusation. Boudicca's hands are raw, knuckles red and swollen from dragging the wounded to safety, from clawing at the earth in desperate search for survivors. Her breath shudders in her chest, and for a moment, the world narrows to the ache in her bones and the fire in her belly, a fire that refuses to die, no matter how cold the world becomes. She closes her eyes, feeling the rough wind tug at the wild copper tangle of her hair. It smells of smoke and sweat, threaded with bracken and the faint sweetness of elderflower. She listens, the broken voices of her people, the soft weeping of children, the low, rumbling prayers of the elders as they kneel beside the dead, the crackle of dying embers, the distant rumble of thunder. The world is full of sound, but beneath it all is a silence, a hollow, expectant hush, as if the land itself is holding its breath. Boudicca's mind churns with memory and rage. She sees the faces of her daughters, their eyes wide and haunted. She feels the ghost of Roman hands on her skin, the sting of humiliation, the sharp, unbearable shame. She remembers Prasutagus, her husband, her king, his laughter echoing through the hall, his hand warm in hers. Now he is gone, and the Romans have taken everything her tribe is broken, scattered like leaves before the storm. But she is not broken, not yet. She kneels in the wet grass, her fingers digging into the soil. Mother Earth, hear me. Great horse, lend me your strength. The old words come unbidden, rising from the well of her childhood, from the stories her mother used to tell, as the fire crackled and the shadows danced on the walls of their roundhouse. She feels the weight of her ancestors behind her, fierce and proud, watching with unblinking eyes. The world sharpens around her, every color brighter, every sound louder. She feels the pulse of the land beneath her palms, the ancient power that runs through root and stone. She is Boudicca, daughter of the Iceni, queen by blood and by fury. The Romans have tried to silence her, to break her spirit. But she will not be silenced. She will not be broken. She rises, the mud clinging to her legs, and lifts her chin to the wind. The storm is coming. She can feel it in her bones, in the restless air, in the way her people's eyes turn to her, hungry, desperate, waiting for a sign. She is their hope, their fury, their last, best chance, and she will not fail them. The battered remnants of the Iceni gather in a rough circle at the edge of the ruined settlement. The grass here is flattened by the tread of many feet, the air thick with the smells of wet wool, wood smoke, and fear. Boudicca stands at the center, her cloak billowing in the wind, her eyes fierce as she surveys the faces around her. To her right stands Brada, a grizzled warrior whose beard is streaked with gray and whose arms bear the swirling blue tattoos of their tribe. His tunic, once bright with woad dye, is patched and torn. He clutches a spear, the shaft worn smooth by years of battle. His gaze flickers between Boudicca and the others, wary and calculating. On her left is Ife, a healer and wise woman, her hair braided with bits of bone and feather. The lines at the corners of her eyes speak of long nights tending wounds and burying the dead. She smells of herbs, sage, yarrow, and the sharp tang of fresh blood. Her hands are stained and steady, her voice soft but unyielding. Boudicca draws a breath, tasting the tension in the air. We cannot stay here. If we wait, the Romans will return. They will finish what they started. Brada shifts, the muscles in his jaw working. And where would you have us go, Queen? Our fields are ash. Our stores are empty. The Trinovantes to the south have little love for us, and the Catuvelauni have already bent the knee to Rome. Ife steps forward, her hands folded at her waist. We have our pride. We have our dead. But pride will not feed our children, Boudicca. We need more than fury. We need allies. The circle tightens, bodies pressing closer, eyes fixed on their queen. Boudicca feels the weight of their hope and their fear. She glances at Brada, at Asife, at the faces of her people, scarred, hollow-eyed, but unbroken. We are not alone. The Romans have taken from all of us. The Trinovantes remember the taste of Roman whips. The Cornovi and the Dobunni grumble under heavy taxes. Even the proud Catuvellauni chafe at their chains. If we stand together, if we rise as one, they cannot ignore us. Brada's eyes narrow. And who will lead this rebellion? Who will speak for the tribes? A shiver runs through the crowd. Boudicca feels it, a ripple of uncertainty. She squares her shoulders, her hands curling into fists. I will lead. I have lost as much as any here. More. The Romans have taken my husband, my dignity, my daughter's innocence. They have burned our homes and salted our fields. I will not rest until they pay for every crime. Aif's gaze softens, a flicker of sympathy crossing her face. And if we fail? If we bring down Rome's wrath upon our heads? Boudicca meets her eyes, unflinching. Then we die with honor. Better to fall fighting than to live as slaves. Brada grunts, shifting his weight. Fine words, Queen, but words will not fill our bellies, nor mend our wounds. The wind gusts, whipping Boudicca's hair across her face. She brushes it aside, her fingers trembling with adrenaline. We will take what we need from the Romans, their grain, their weapons, their gold. We will strike swift and hard before they know what hits them. A murmur rises from the crowd, a mix of fear and excitement, disbelief and longing. Brada's grip tightens on his spear, knuckles white. You would have us become raiders, bandits? I would have us become free. The Romans call us savages. Let them taste the fury they have sown. Aif steps closer, her hand resting lightly on Boudicca's arm. And the gods, Boudicca, what of our ancestors? Will they bless this path? Boudicca looks to the sky, gray and unyielding. The gods have watched us suffer long enough. It is time we remind them who we are. A hush falls, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder and the soft sobbing of a child. Boudicca feels the eyes of her people on her, searching, weighing, hoping she sees their hunger, not just for food, but for justice, for vengeance, for something to believe in. She steps forward, planting her feet in the mud. I will go to the Trinovantes. I will speak to their chiefs, remind them of their own pain. Brada, gather what warriors you can. Aif, tend to the wounded, prepare the old rites. Tonight, we call upon the spirits of our ancestors. Tonight, we begin. Brada hesitates, then nods, his mouth grim. As you command, Queen. Aif squeezes Boudicca's arm, her eyes shining with something like hope. The world before dawn was a bruise, deep violet and heavy with the scent of damp earth and trampled grass. Mist clung to the low hollows of the land, swirling in ghostly ribbons between the twisted hawthorns and the shattered stones of forgotten burial mounds. The sky above Camulodunum, once proud Roman Colchester, was streaked with the faintest promise of morning, a thin blade of gold slicing through the clouds. Beneath that uncertain light, Boudicca waited. She stood at the edge of a tangled copse, her breath rising in pale plumes that mingled with the fog. The air was thick with the smells of sweat, leather, and the acrid tang of burnt wood from the smoldering ruins behind her. Every muscle in her body thrummed with tension, as if her bones themselves remembered the pain of chains and the sting of Roman whips. Her hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the shaft of her spear so tightly her knuckles blanched around her. The Iceni warriors stirred. They were a river of shadowed forms, cloaks drawn tight against the chill, faces painted in swirling blue woad that glowed eerily beneath the gray dawn. The soft clatter of iron blades and the creak of wooden shields blended with the low murmur of voices, some praying to ancient gods, others whispering to lost kin. Horses stamped and snorted, their breath steaming in the cool air, the scent of their sweat mingling with the loamy metallic tang of blood from wounds hastily bound. Boudicca's heart pounded, a drumbeat echoing the distant thunder of hooves. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her back, her daughters, the Iceni, and the countless dispossessed who had flocked to her banner. Each carried their own scars, their own reasons for vengeance. But all looked to her now. The world felt suspended, poised on the edge of violence and history. Somewhere in the Roman stronghold, the invaders would be waking, their lives still wrapped in the illusion of safety. Did they dream of home? Did they think the land would bend and break beneath their boots forever? Boudicca's lips curled in a silent snarl. A sudden gust of wind rattled through the trees, carrying the distant tang of smoke and the faint, bitter scent of Roman cook fires. She closed her eyes, letting the cold seep into her bones, forcing herself to feel every ache, every bruise. The pain was a reminder. She was alive, and so were her daughters. She could still fight inside her mind. A storm raged, a torrent of memory and fury. She saw again the cold stone of the forum where she had been lashed, the jeering faces of Roman soldiers, the blood staining her daughters' tunics. She heard the laughter, the Latin words she could not understand, but felt in her marrow. Humiliation had burned her clean, forging something harder than iron within her soul. Now, as the first rays of sun bled across the horizon, Boudicca opened her eyes. The world sharpened into focus. The silver dew on the grass, the rough wool of her cloak against her neck, the taste of ash and hope on her tongue. She turned, searching for the faces of her daughters amid the warriors, finding them pale and fierce, their eyes wide with fear and something fiercer. She forced her breath steady. Today, the Romans will learn what it means to steal from the wolf's den. The words hung in the air, a promise and a prayer. Boudicca straightened her spine, feeling the weight of her ancestors at her back, their spirits pressing close, urging her onward. She could almost smell the sweet, smoky scent of their offerings, hear the distant beat of ritual drums. The land itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. She lifted her spear, the polished iron head catching the first true light of day, and knew that soon the silence would shatter. Blood would flow, and thunder would roar. But for this breathless moment, Boudicca stood at the edge of legend, her heart a furnace, her spirit unbroken. The camp was alive with the restless energy of those who knew death waited just beyond the horizon. Fires crackled, sending up columns of smoke, laced with the scents of roasting meat and damp moss. Warriors sharpened blades on whetstones, the rasping sound a constant undercurrent. Children, too young to fight, huddled close to their mothers, wide-eyed and silent. Boudicca moved among her people, her tall frame wrapped in a cloak of deep crimson wool, its hem darkened by mud. Her copper hair, wild and unbound, flickered like fire in the morning light. She paused beside an old friend, Branwen, a wiry woman with a scar running the length of her jaw, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. Branwen glanced up, her hands busy braiding her daughter's hair. "You look as if you've not slept, Boudicca. Who can sleep with Roman steel so close? My dreams are full of fire and screams." Branwen's daughter, a slip of a girl with a face smudged in woad, looked up, her braid half finished. "Will you really fight the Romans, Queen? Even their gods?" Boudicca knelt, the rough grass prickling her knees, and met the girl's gaze. "We fight for more than blood or land. We fight because they would make us less than human. We fight so you will never know the taste of chains." The girl's eyes widened, then she nodded, determination blooming on her face. Branwen squeezed Boudicca's shoulder, her grip fierce. A horn sounded, low and mournful, rippling through the camp. The warriors stilled, eyes turning toward the edge of the woods. Epona, a young chieftain of the Trinovantes, strode into view. Her hair was braided with feathers and silver, her cloak a patchwork of fox pelts. She carried a curved sword at her hip, and her gaze flickered with wary respect. "Queen Boudicca." "Our scouts report movement in the Roman town. They're fortifying the temple, gathering their women and children behind stone walls." Boudicca rose, brushing dew from her knees. "They think their gods will save them. Their gods are foreign here. The land remembers its own." A tense silence fell. The warriors shifted, the clink of metal echoing like distant thunder. Boudicca studied Epona, noting the tension in her jaw, the way her hand hovered near her sword. "You doubt me. I doubt Rome's strength. Their walls are high, their soldiers many. My people have lost much already. If we fail, we do not fail. We show them what it means to steal daughters and dishonor queens. We burn their arrogance to ash. We are not alone, Epona. All the tribes watch. If we fall, they will rise. If we win, they will follow. And if the Romans bring their legions, let them come. We are the storm. We are the fire. For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of flames and the distant caw of crows. Then Epona nodded, a slow, grudging respect in her posture. So be it. My warriors are yours, Queen. Boudicca's heart surged with gratitude and fear, twin flames burning within her chest. She turned to the gathered warriors, her voice ringing out, "Prepare yourselves. The time is near. We strike when the sun is high." The crowd murmured, a low wave of anticipation and dread. Boudicca caught her daughter's gazes, Isolde, fierce and trembling, and Rhiannon, eyes shining with tears held in check. She crossed to them, gathering them close. Their bodies were warm against hers, their hair smelling of smoke and wildflowers. "Mother, will you come back to us? I will always return, even if the world burns. Promise." "I promise," she lied, knowing the gods would judge her for it. She pulled away, her heart aching with the weight of all she could not protect. The wind shifted, carrying the distant clang of Roman armor, the sharp tang of iron and sweat. She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin. The time... A heavy gray dawn pressed down on the world, smothering the light and chilling the skin. The sky above Londinium was a low, endless ceiling of cloud, bruised purple and iron, threatening rain, but holding it back as if the heavens themselves waited, breathless, for what would come. The River Thames, broad, sluggish, and muddied by the night's storms, carried the cold, metallic scent of water and wet earth through the city's narrow streets. A thin mist curled above the riverbanks, swallowing the distant shapes of Roman villas and the wooden piers that jutted out into the flow. Boudicca stood at the edge of a ruined field, boots sunk in the black, sticky mud, her cloak heavy with dew, and the lingering stink of smoke from the night's campfires. Her copper hair, once a wild, flaming banner, was matted with sweat and soot, tangled by days of marching and sleepless nights. Beneath her furs, the rough wool of her tunic scratched at her skin, and the weight of her sword belt pressed bruises into her hips. Her hands, wrapped around the haft of her spear, were raw and red. The calluses split open by the unending march. The sounds of her army washed over her, the clatter of bronze and iron as warriors checked their blades, the guttural shouts of orders in the Iceni tongue, and the harsher dialects of allied tribes. Horses stamped and snorted. their warm breath steaming in the cold air, and the faint, bitter tang of dung and sweat mingled with the sharper notes of pine smoke and roasting grain. Somewhere nearby, a child wailed quickly, hushed by a mother's rough hands. The air was thick with fear and hunger and something else, something electric, a crackle of anticipation that made every breath taste of copper and iron. Boudicca's eyes swept the horizon. The city of Londinium lay ahead, its Roman walls rising pale and defiant against the gloom. She could see the tiled roofs, the mosaic courtyards, the columns of the governor's palace, symbols of Rome's order, their angles sharp and unnatural against the rolling green wildness of Britannia. But there was chaos, too. Plumes of smoke rose from scattered fires. The gates stood open, and crowds of desperate townsfolk pressed against the roads, fleeing southward with whatever they could carry. The city was already abandoned by its defenders. The Roman legions had retreated, leaving only the weak, the wounded, and the stubborn behind. She drew a slow, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the cold, damp air. It tasted of earth and ashes, of things ending and things beginning. Her heart thudded, heavy as a war drum, in her chest. Can I do this, she thought? Can I be the fire that burns away Rome's shadow? Or will I become what I hate? The question gnawed at her, as sharp and persistent as the ache in her legs. Every step had brought her closer to this, closer to vengeance, to justice, to the edge of something she could not yet see. She thought of her daughters, asleep in the cart behind the lines, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. She thought of Prasutagus, her husband, whose broken body had been left to rot by Roman greed. She thought of the humiliation, the whip, the jeering laughter of soldiers as they tore her dignity away. A gust of wind tugged at her cloak, carrying the distant clang of a temple bell and the acrid scent of burning pitch. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds and smells wash over her, grounding herself in the world's rawness. Her tribe had always believed that the land spoke, through wind, through water, through the cries of birds at dawn. Today, the land was silent, waiting. I am Boudicca, she told herself, queen of the Iceni. Daughter of wolves and storms, Rome will remember my name. She tightened her grip on her spear until her knuckles whitened. The cold bit into her skin, but she welcomed it. Pain was a reminder that she lived, that she could still choose. Around her, warriors gathered, their faces painted in woad and ash, eyes fierce and wild. They looked to her, not just for orders, but for hope, for purpose, for the spark that would ignite the world. She straightened her back, feeling the weight of history settle across her shoulders like a mantle. There could be no turning back. Not now. The city waited. The fire within her burned hotter than the dawn. A horn blared, a deep, mournful note that vibrated through the fog. The sound was picked up by others, echoing along the riverbanks, rolling through the makeshift camps. Boudicca strode forward, her boots squelching in the mud, as two of her closest allies approached Ellen, tall and broad-shouldered, her face marked with swirling blue tattoos, fell in beside her. She wore a wolfskin cloak, the fur slick with rain, and her hands rested on the pommel of a heavy iron sword. Her eyes, sharp as flint, flicked from Boudicca to the city and back. "Londinium is weak," Ellen said, voice low and rough. "They've left it for us. The Romans run like frightened deer." On Boudicca's other side, young Branwen hurried to catch up. Branwen was barely more than a girl, her hair braided with bits of bone and colored thread, her skin pale beneath the grime. She clutched a battered shield, its rim notched and splintered from the last battle. Her breath came in quick bursts, fogging in the cold. "Some of our people are inside," Branwen said, voice trembling. "Slaves, merchants, children." "If we burn the city," Ellen cut her off with a snort. "If we do not, the Romans will return and slaughter us all. Mercy is a luxury for the victors." Boudicca stopped, and both women turned to her, waiting. She could feel their eyes on her, searching for certainty. She let the silence stretch, listening to the distant clamor of the city, the wails, the shouts, the crash of carts overturning in the narrow streets. "Branwen is right," Boudicca said at last, her voice steady but soft. "We must be careful, but we cannot leave Rome's nest unscathed. We must send a message." Ellen's lips twisted into a grim smile. A message written in fire. Boudicca nodded, feeling the weight of every life in her hands. She looked at Branwen, saw the fear and hope warring in the girl's eyes. "Gather those who can fight. Warn our people inside the walls. Give them a chance to flee." Branwen hesitated, her fingers tightening on her shield. "And if they cannot escape?" Boudicca reached out, laying a hand on the girl's shoulder. The wool of Branwen's cloak was damp and rough against her palm. "Then we do what we must, but we do not forget who we are. We are not Rome." Ellen grunted, shifting her weight. "Some of our warriors are hungry for blood. They want revenge for Camulodunum, for their families." Boudicca's jaw clenched. She remembered the charred ruins of her own home, the bodies left for the crows. "So do I. But if we become monsters, Rome wins." Ellen's gaze softened, just for a moment, before she looked away. "You are right, my queen, as always." A sudden commotion broke out behind them. A group of warriors arguing, voices rising in anger. Boudicca turned, her cloak swirling, and strode toward them. Mud splattered up her legs, cold and gritty. The men fell silent as she approached, heads bowed, eyes wary. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice ringing out like a bell. A young man stepped forward, his face streaked with soot and blood, a wild look in his eyes. "Why do we wait? The city is ours. Let us take it, now before the Romans return." Boudicca studied him, saw the desperation in his trembling hands, the hunger in his eyes. She understood it. It lived inside her too, but she would not unleash it blindly. "We wait," she said, "because our people are inside, because every life matters. We strike when I give the order, and not before." The young man's shoulders slumped, but a mutter rippled through the crowd. Ellen stepped forward, her presence a warning. The tension hung thick in the air, like the promise of a storm. Boudicca addressed them all, her voice carrying over the restless crowd. "We are warriors, not butchers. Rome has brought us to this, but we will not lose ourselves. When the time comes, you will have your vengeance, but you will do it with honor." A hush fell. The only sounds were the crackle of distant fires and the low, anxious whinnies of horses. Boudicca's heart pounded. She could feel the eyes of her army on her, the future hanging in the balance. A heavy, smoky dusk settled over the shattered fields beyond Londinium. The air was thick with the scent of scorched timber and trampled earth. Boudicca stood at the edge of the rebel encampment, her bare feet pressed into the cold, churned mud, feeling the land's pulse beneath her toes, a heartbeat both wounded and wild. The sky above was a bruised purple, streaked with smears of gold and ash where the sun bled its last over the horizon. Wind hissed through the crooked lines of blackened trees, carrying with it the sharp tang of burnt grain and the faint metallic promise of rain. All around her, the Iceni and their allies moved in restless clusters. Some crouched by fires, the flames licking hungrily at the damp wood, casting leaping shadows on faces smeared with soot and tears. Others stalked between tents made from stitched hides and scavenged Roman canvas, their voices low and urgent, words muffled by the night's rising mist, horses stamped and whickered, tossing their tangled manes, the scent of their sweat mingling with the earthy reek of straw and spilled ale. Boudicca's cloak, once a regal crimson, now hung heavy and singed about her shoulders, its hem stiff with dried blood and mud. Her copper hair, wild and matted, clung to her brow, still smelling faintly of smoke and the sweet, acrid resin of pine. She could taste the grit of ash on her tongue each time she breathed, and her hands, calloused, trembling, scarred, tightened around the haft of her spear. Every muscle in her body ached, every joint stiff from days of marching and nights spent hunched in council or curled beside her daughters in restless, haunted sleep. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the camp swirl around her, the crackle of fire, the distant wail of a child, the low hum of a dirge sung in the language of her ancestors. The melody rose and fell, weaving through the cold air like a ghostly hand, brushing the nape of her neck and stirring memories she could not banish. She felt the weight of so many eyes upon her, warriors, elders, mothers, and the ragged, desperate children who clung to their skirts. They looked to her now, not just as a queen, but as a spirit of vengeance, a living banner of hope and fury. But hope was a fragile thing beneath the hard shell of her resolve. Boudicca's heart thudded with doubt. Had she led her people too far? Had her thirst for retribution blinded her to the cost? The Roman towns burned, yes, their soldiers slaughtered in the streets, their temples toppled, their arrogance humbled. But each victory brought new wounds. The faces of her fallen, the hollow-eyed survivors, the growing hunger, and the rumors of Roman legions regrouping in the west. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the necklace of wolf teeth, her father's, her own, digging into her skin. The amulet was warm, slick with sweat, and she remembered the old stories, how the spirits of the land watched from the shadows, judging, guiding, sometimes punishing those who dared to defy fate. Every night since Londinium fell, her dreams had been thick with omens, rivers running red, crows wheeling over corpses, her daughters' faces streaked with blood and moonlight. Tonight, as the rebels gathered to feast and mourn, to raise their voices in songs of triumph and grief, Boudicca felt the old fears stirring. The ground beneath her seemed to shift, soft and treacherous as bog mud. She opened her eyes, searching the darkness for a sign, for the flicker of ancestral fire, for a whisper on the wind that might tell her which path to choose. The night was alive with spirits, or so the Druids said on such a night. The veil between worlds thinned, and the dead walked among the living. Boudicca shivered, not from cold, but from the weight of unseen eyes, and the knowledge that every choice she made now would echo through the ages. She drew a long, slow breath, tasting the future on the air, bitter, sharp, uncertain, and steeled herself for what must come. A sudden peal of laughter cut through the camp's uneasy quiet, sharp as a blade. Boudicca turned, her eyes narrowing, and saw Aif, her eldest daughter, striding toward her. Aif's cloak was thrown back, revealing a tunic stained with blood and soot, her hair braided with scraps of Roman silver. Her face was flushed with the heat of the fire and the wild energy of victory, but her eyes, so like Boudicca's own, were hard, searching. "Mother," Aif called, her voice low but fierce. "They're waiting for you. The men from the Trinovantes want to speak. Again. They say the omens are good, that the spirits favor us. But they're afraid. I can smell it on them. Let them be afraid. The Romans should be twice as fearful." The girl's hands were clenched, her knuckles white. "You should eat. You haven't touched food since dawn." "I will eat when I have peace," Boudicca replied, her voice gentle but unyielding. "There may never be peace, not for us." Before Boudicca could answer, a shadow loomed at the edge of the firelight. It was Cadairn, the Druid. His robes, once white, were stained with earth and streaked with ochre. His hair, tangled and gray, hung down to his shoulders, and his fingers were marked with the ink of old rituals. He bowed his head in respect, but his gaze was sharp, assessing Queen Boudicca, Cadarn intoned, his voice carrying the weight of ancient forests and the hush of sacred groves. The men are uneasy. They say the omens are mixed. Some saw a fox in the ashes of Londinium. Others heard a raven call at noon. They ask, should we press on or wait for the Romans to come to us? And what do you say, Cadarn? You are the keeper of the old ways. Do the spirits favor us, or do they warn us away? The spirits are restless. They hunger for sacrifice, for justice, but they are also wary. Blood calls to blood, and the Romans are not easily broken. We have broken them before. We will do it again. Victory breeds pride, and pride blinds. The Romans will not flee forever. They regroup, they plan. Their governor, Paulinus, he is a wolf with iron teeth. She looked at her daughter, then at the Druid, weighing their words. The camp was alive with voices now, some defiant, some fearful, all hungry for certainty. She could not give them what she did not possess. She gestured for Cadarn and Ife to follow, leading them toward the largest fire, where the chieftains of the allied tribes waited. The flames spat sparks into the night, illuminating faces drawn with exhaustion and hope. The men of the Trinovantes, tall and broad-shouldered, wore torques of twisted gold and iron, their eyes wary. The women of the Catuvellauni sat nearby, faces shadowed by the hoods of their cloaks, murmuring prayers to their household gods. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the distant whinny of a horse. She spoke, her voice steady, each word falling like a stone into a pond. We have burned Camulodunum. We have razed Londinium. The Romans run from us, their pride shattered, their dead unburied. But the wolf still hunts us. Paulinus is gathering his legions. He will not let us rest. We are tired, Queen. Our dead are many. Our children hunger. Should we not take what we have won and return home? Return to what? To ashes and Roman chains? They will come for us, whether we stand or flee. Bran's jaw clenched. We have wives to protect, fields to sow. This war is not finished, Boudicca cut in, her words ringing with iron certainty. If we falter now, the Romans will slaughter us in our sleep. They will salt our fields and sell our children. I have seen it. The dawn was a blade of cold steel, slicing through the mist that clung to the fields of eastern Britannia. Boudicca stood atop a low rise, her silhouette stark against the bruised sky, the hem of her woad-stained cloak rippling in the bitter wind. The land before her, her land, was a patchwork of frost-bitten heather, trampled grass, and the blackened scars of old campfires. The air was sharp with the scent of peat and distant smoke, tinged with the sour tang of sweat and horses. Beneath her bare feet, the earth was cold, damp, alive with the pulse of the world waking beneath her. She drew a long breath, filling her lungs with the rawness of morning. Every inhale stung her chest, but she welcomed the pain. It was proof she still lived, that she could still feel, even after all she had lost. All around her, the camp stirred Iceni warriors, cloaked in rough wool and scraps of Roman leather, moved like shadows through the low fog. The clatter of spearheads, the murmur of voices, some rough with sleep, others sharp with nerves, rose and fell like the tide. Somewhere, a child cried, its thin wail snatched away by the wind. Boudicca's hands were numb, her knuckles raw from gripping the hilt of her sword through the long, sleepless night. She flexed her fingers, feeling the ache in her joints, the ache of a body battered by grief, by battle, by the weight of 1,000 eyes looking to her for hope. Her hair, wild and copper bright, whipped about her face, stinging her cheeks. She tasted salt, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear on her lips. She closed her eyes for a moment, listening not just to the sounds of the living, but to the deeper currents. The slow, steady rhythm of hooves stamping in the mud, the distant caw of a raven, the low chant of a druid blessing the morning. She let her mind drift to the world beneath the world, the spirits of her ancestors, the old gods of river and stone. She imagined them watching her, their voices a low murmur at the edge of hearing. Is this what you wanted for me? She wondered, her thoughts turning inward, heavy as the clouds overhead. To stand here on the edge of all things, with the fate of my people in my hands? Her heart pounded, a war drum in her chest. She remembered her daughters, their faces pale in the firelight, their eyes wide with questions she could not answer. She remembered Prasutagus, his hand warm in hers, his voice promising that Rome could be bargained with. She remembered the moment that hope died. A gust of wind tore through the camp, rattling the bones of the earth. Boudicca shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. The wool was coarse, patched in places with the faded blue of her tribe, in others with the red and gold of Roman spoil. The contrast was a bitter joke. Her people forced to wear the skin of their enemies, to survive on what they could scavenge from the ruins. Her body ached with exhaustion, but she refused to show it. She straightened her spine, feeling the rough weave of her dress against her skin, the cold bite of the iron torque at her throat, a mark of her rank, and now a chain she would not break. Her feet were caked with mud, her calves streaked with the blue patterns of the Iceni, drawn in the old ways for protection and strength. In the distance, the sun finally broke through the clouds, a thin blade of gold slicing across the field. It glinted off spear points and the battered bronze of stolen helmets. Boudicca watched as her warriors gathered, drawn by the promise of movement, of purpose. The air buzzed with anticipation and dread. Today, she thought, we march not as prey, but as wolves. But beneath her resolve, a question gnawed. Will I lead them to freedom or to slaughter? She opened her eyes, letting the morning flood in, every color and sound sharper than before. The red of blood, the blue of woad, the gray of ash. The day was beginning, and with it, the march of iron. The camp was a hive of restless energy. Fires sputtered in the morning gloom, sending up ribbons of smoke that mingled with the mist. Warriors sharpened blades on whetstones, their faces set in grim determination. Horses stamped and snorted, their breath steaming in the chill air. The smell of roasting barley cakes and charred meat drifted from a nearby fire, mingling with the tang of sweat and wet wool. Boudicca strode through the camp, her boots squelching in the mud, the weight of her sword comforting at her hip. She was searching for two of her most trusted allies. Aelia, a fierce Atrabats woman who had once served as a Roman auxiliary, and Bran, her oldest friend, a druid with a face like weathered oak and eyes that missed nothing. She found them by the edge of the camp, speaking in low voices. Aelia's arms were folded, her dark hair pulled into a rough braid, her face streaked with soot. Bran leaned on his staff, his white robe stained with earth and ash. The antlered crown of his office perched askew on his head. Boudicca approached, her footsteps deliberate. Aelia looked up first, her eyes flashing with something between defiance and concern. We cannot wait any longer, Boudicca. The scouts say Paulinus is coming. Roman banners, legions, not just auxiliaries. If we stay here, we'll be caught in the open. Bran's gaze was steady, his voice soft as he added, but if we run, we lose the ground we've bled for, and the omens are uncertain. Boudicca studied their faces, reading the tension in the set of Aelia's jaw, the worry in Bran's furrowed brow. She felt the weight of their faith and their fear pressing in around her. We have more warriors than ever before. The Trinovantes, the Catuvelauni, even the old rivals from the Dobuni. They look to us for courage. If we retreat now, we may never rally them again. Aelia's lips pressed into a thin line. If we stand and fight, we could be crushed. The Romans are not like us. They fight in lines, shields locked, iron discipline. We have numbers, yes, but little armor. Few horses. Bran's staff thumped softly against the earth. The spirits say the land favors us, but the gods are fickle. There are signs. A fox dead at the threshold, the moon veiled in blood. These are warnings. Boudicca. Boudicca's jaw tightened. She looked past them to where her daughters sat by a dying fire, braiding each other's hair with nimble fingers. The sight twisted something inside her, a longing for a world where their hands held only flowers, not knives. She turned back to her advisors. I know what we risk, but if we scatter now, Rome will hunt us down, tribe by tribe, until nothing remains but stories. I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees. Alia's eyes softened, her voice dropping. And your daughters, will you risk them as well? The question cut deep. Boudicca's mouth went dry. She looked away, feeling the sting of tears she would not let fall. They are all I have left, she whispered. But what kind of world will they inherit if I do nothing? Alia reached out, her hand rough and warm, squeezing Boudicca's arm. We will stand with you, but promise me, if the tide turns, you will not throw your life away. Your people need you alive. Bran nodded, his gaze grave. The land remembers those who endure, not just those who burn bright and vanish. Boudicca drew a long, shaky breath. The wind shifted, bringing with it the salt tang of the distant sea. She felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders, heavier than any armor. We march, she said at last, her voice steady. We meet Paulinus on ground of our choosing. If we die, let it be with the world watching. Alia smiled, a fierce, sad smile. Then let us make ready. The Romans will find more than they bargained for. Bran's staff thudded once more, a quiet blessing. May the gods walk with us. As they turned to make preparations, Boudicca felt the eyes of her warriors upon her. Some looked to her with hope, others with fear, all with expectation. She squared her shoulders, letting her cloak billow behind her, a banner of blue and defiance. The camp came alive with purpose. Men and women, strapped on battered armor, painted their faces with woad, whispered prayers to the old gods. Children gathered stones for slings. Elders sharpened stakes for the barricades. The march of iron had begun. A cold dawn crept over the land, painting the sky with bruised streaks of purple and gray. The mist was thick and low, slithering through the hollows of the British earth like a living thing. Boudicca stood at the edge of the encampment, her boots sinking into the dew-soaked grass. The world felt muffled, as if the fog had stolen not only the sight of the distant hills, but the very sound from the air. Only the faintest crackle of campfires and the distant whinnying of restless horses broke the silence. The air was sharp with the scent of wet earth, wood smoke, and the tang of sweat and fear. Boudicca's cloak, woven from thick, coarse wool, clung damply to her shoulders. The deep indigo dye had faded in places, leaving it mottled like a raven's wing. Her copper hair, wild and unbound, glistened with beads of moisture, each strand catching the wan light like a thread of fire. She could feel the chill settling in her bones, a cold that came not just from the weather, but from the knowledge of what lay ahead. She looked out over the makeshift camp. Warriors huddled in small groups, sharing the last of the oat cakes and bitter mead, their faces drawn and hollow-eyed. Children clung to mothers, their small fingers white-knuckled with dread. Horses shifted in the gloom, stamping and tossing their manes, their breath rising in ghostly plumes. Shields, battered and painted with the twisting designs of the Iceni, leaned against carts and tree trunks. Spears jutted from the ground like a forest of dead branches. The air was thick with the smell of leather, sweat, and the iron tang of sharpened blades. Boudicca's heart pounded, each beat echoing the drum of distant thunder. She pressed her palm to her chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath her ribs, a reminder that she was alive, that she was still queen, even here at the edge of ruin. She closed her eyes and breathed deep, drawing in the sense of her people, her land, her fate. This is where it ends, or where it begins again, in blood and legend. She remembered the words of the Druids, whispered to her as a child beneath the ancient oaks. The land remembers, the blood remembers. Stand firm, and the world will tremble. She was the land's daughter, its voice and its vengeance. But now, as the sky lightened and the first crows called from the trees, she felt the weight of every life behind her, every mother, every child, every man who had followed her into the mouth of the lion. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the force of holding it all inside. She thought of her daughters, sleeping fitfully in the shelter of a cart, their faces streaked with grime and tears. She thought of Prasutagus, her lost king, whose death had set all this in motion. She thought of the Romans, their cold armor gleaming, their discipline unbroken, their hearts untouched by the grief that burned in hers. She opened her eyes and let the morning fill her. The mist was thinning, the sky brightening soon. The Romans would come. She could almost hear the distant tramp of their iron-shod boots, the clatter of their shields, the barked orders in a tongue that tasted of conquest and cruelty. Boudicca straightened her back, drawing herself up to her full height. She was tall, taller than most men, her presence commanding even in silence. Her scars, gifts from battle and betrayal, itched beneath her tunic. She let her gaze travel across her people, drinking in every face, every mark of suffering and resolve. They look to me. They need fire, not fear. They need hope, even if it is only a spark in the darkness. She clenched her fists, feeling the roughness of her calloused palms, the bite of her nails. She would give them that spark. She would stand, even if the world fell away beneath her feet. The wind shifted, carrying the distant scent of pine and something darker. Smoke, perhaps, or the coming of war. A single tear traced a line down her cheek, hot against the cold. She let it fall, unashamed. There was no room for shame here, only for courage and the memory of all that had been lost. Let them come. Let them see what the fury of a broken queen can do. The first rays of sun pierced the clouds, striking the bronze torch at her throat and setting it ablaze. She lifted her chin and walked back toward her people, her footsteps steady, her resolve steel hard. The day of reckoning had come. The camp was a hive of nervous energy, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Boudicca strode through the clusters of warriors, her cloak trailing behind her, the mud sucking at her boots. She passed by a group of elders, their white hair braided with beads and feathers, their eyes shadowed with worry. They nodded in silent respect as she moved on. Near the center of the camp, two figures awaited her. Aif, her most trusted shield sister, and Bran, the chieftain of a neighboring tribe who had brought his own warriors to the cause. Aif was sharpening her sword, the stone rasping against the blade in a steady rhythm. Bran paced back and forth, his heavy cloak swirling around his legs, his hand never straying far from the hilt of his axe. Boudicca stopped before them, her breath steaming in the cold air. The scent of wood smoke clung to Aif's hair. Mingling with the metallic tang of oiled steel, Bran's cloak was stained with old blood, the fur at his collar matted and bristling. Aif looked up, her eyes fierce and bright. "The men are restless, my queen. They fear the Romans will crush us before the sun is high." Bran snorted, his voice low and rough. "They are right to fear. The Romans are not like us. They march in lines, shields locked, spears bristling like the quills of a boar. They do not break, not easily." Boudicca met his gaze, her own eyes hard as flint. "And yet they bleed, as all men do. They can be broken. We have shown them that already." Aife's lips twisted in a wry smile. "Not enough. They come now with all their strength. Paulinus himself leads them. The crows will feast today, one way or another." Bran spat into the grass, his jaw clenched. "I have lost too many already. My son fell at Camulodunum, my brother at Londinium. How many more must die before we see the end of this?" Boudicca felt the weight of his grief, heavy as a stone in her chest. She crouched beside him, placing a hand on his arm. The warmth of her touch seemed to steady him, though his muscles trembled beneath her fingers. "We fight for the living, Bran, for the ones who cannot fight for themselves, for the children who will grow up free or not at all." Aif sheathed her sword, the sound ringing out sharp and clear. "The men need words, Boudicca. They need to see you stand before them. Give them something to hold to when the Romans come screaming down upon us." Boudicca nodded, rising to her feet. She glanced at the horizon, where the mist was lifting to reveal the narrow defile where they would make their stand. The land rose steeply on either side, hemming them in, a blessing and a curse. She turned back to Aif and Bran, her voice low. "Gather the chieftains. I will speak to them now." Bran hesitated, his face etched with doubt and desperation. "And if we lose, Boudicca, what then? The Romans will show no mercy." Boudicca's jaw tightened. "If we lose, we become legend. They will remember us, even as they try to erase us." The land will remember. Ife's hand found Boudicca's, squeezing it tight. You are the fire, my queen. We will follow, wherever you lead. The three of them moved through the camp, gathering the leaders, old and young, scarred and untested. They assembled before a battered wagon, its sides scorched and splintered from battles. Past Boudicca climbed atop it, her cloak billowing, her hair a red banner in the morning light. She looked out over her people, warriors painted with blue woad, faces marked by fear and hope, women clutching spears, their eyes blazing, children peering from behind skirts, their innocence already scarred by war. Boudicca raised her arms, her voice ringing out strong and clear. Hear me, people of Britannia. The Romans come, thinking us broken, thinking us weak. But we are the children of the land, the blood of the old tribes. We have burned their cities, shattered their pride. Today, we stand together, free men and women, not slaves. The dawn was a gray, sullen thing, stretched thin and cold across the battered hills of Britannia smoke, thick and acrid, drifted in ragged veils over the ruined earth, turning the first light into a ghostly haze. Ash lay everywhere, on the blackened grass, in the splintered woods, clinging to the tangled cloaks of the Iceni as they moved through the aftermath of disaster. The air was sharp with the scent of burnt thatch, scorched flesh, and the copper tang of old blood, mingling with the persistent, mournful odor of damp earth. Beneath it all, the faint sweetness of crushed heather and wild garlic tried and failed to mask the stench of defeat. Boudicca's boots squelched in the mud, her every step a reminder of the rain that had battered the land through the night. Her feet were numb, toes blistered and raw, but she forced herself forward, chin high, spine straight. Despite the exhaustion that pressed on her like a physical weight, the heavy wool of her cloak, once a deep, proud crimson, was now streaked with soot and torn at the hem. Underneath, her linen tunic clung to her skin, damp and gritty with grime. Her copper hair, usually a wild, defiant mane, was matted and tangled, streaked with ash and rainwater, framing a face drawn tight with pain and resolve. The moorland was silent except for the cawing of distant crows and the shuffling, broken movements of her people. The Iceni, her people, moved in small, ragged clusters, their eyes hollow, their voices hushed. Some wept openly, clutching what little they had salvaged from the ruins. Others' faces smeared with soot stared at nothing, lost in the endless echo of their own grief. Children shivered in their mothers' arms. Old warriors, their swords notched and battered, leaned on spears and stared out over the blackened fields, as if searching for meaning in the ashes. Boudicca paused on a low rise, the wind tugging at her cloak, chilling the sweat on her skin. She looked back, always back, toward the distant line of trees where, only hours ago, Roman shields had glinted like the scales of some monstrous, cold-blooded beast. She could still hear the memory of iron striking iron, the screams of the dying, the thud of hooves, and the crackle of burning wagons. The battle had ended swiftly, brutally, the Roman discipline slicing through her wild, desperate army like a scythe through grass. Her hands ached from gripping her sword, the knuckles swollen, the blade itself nicked and dulled by the chaos of the fight. She could still feel the jarring impact of parrying Roman steel, the sickening give of flesh beneath her strikes, the spray of blood hot against her cheek. But it was the silence after, the sudden terrible stillness that haunted her most when the shouts faded and the smoke began to settle. All that remained was loss. She breathed in, the cold air burning her lungs, and forced her thoughts to focus. There was no time for despair. Her daughters needed her. Her people, those who survived, needed her. She had led them into the fire. Now she must lead them out of the ashes. Is this what remains of rebellion? Is this the price of defiance, the cost of daring to dream of freedom? A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the weight of memory. She remembered the promise she had made, not just to herself, but to her daughters, to her murdered husband, to every woman who had wept beneath the Roman yoke. She would not break, she would not let the fire die. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant, unmistakable sound of Roman horns, harsh, triumphant, echoing over the hills. Boudicca's fists tightened at her sides. The Romans were not far behind. The hunt had begun. She turned to the cluster of survivors gathering behind her, searching their faces for hope, for strength, for anything that might keep them moving. The sight of her daughters, bloodied, silent, but alive, gave her a flicker of something fierce and stubborn. She would keep them safe. She would find a way. Boudicca squared her shoulders, the taste of ash thick on her tongue, and spoke, her voice low, steady, carrying over the wind and the ruin. We move, now, before the wolves circle back. The words were simple, but in them was the echo of every battle cry, every oath of vengeance. She would not let Rome have the last word. Not yet. The survivors trudged on, their footsteps muffled by the sodden ground. Boudicca led them into the shadow of a twisted oak, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The ancient tree had once marked a boundary between Iceni lands and those claimed by the Trinovantes, but now all borders were blurred by fire and fear. At her side walked her eldest daughter, Isolde, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. Isolde's eyes, so like Boudicca's, fierce and haunted, darted from shadow to shadow, searching for threats or hope, whichever came first. Behind them limped Aelia, the younger, her left arm bound in a makeshift sling, lips pressed tight against the pain. They were joined by two of Boudicca's most trusted companions, Era, the old healer, and Bran, a grizzled warrior whose beard was matted with blood. Era moved with a measured urgency, her basket of herbs and bandages clutched to her chest. Bran's hand never left the hilt of his sword, his gaze scanning the horizon with the wary patience of a hunted fox. Boudicca stopped beneath the oak, letting the others gather close. The cold seeped through her boots, biting at her toes. She looked at Era, whose wrinkled hands trembled as she rummaged through her basket. Era, how many wounded? Era shook her head, her gray hair escaping its braid. Too many, my queen. Some will not last the day. We have little willow bark left for the pain, and the bandages are nearly gone. I can do little more than pray to the old gods. She paused, eyes shining with unshed tears. You have done more than enough. The gods see your work. Bran snorted, shifting his weight. The gods? If they watched us burn. His voice was a low growl, heavy with bitterness. He spat into the mud, the gesture sharp and defiant. Isolde stepped forward, her fists clenched. Do not speak against the gods, Bran. We have nothing left if we lose faith. Bran met her gaze, his eyes bloodshot but unyielding. Faith did not stop Roman swords. Faith did not save my sons. Alia's voice was barely a whisper, nor did fear. A heavy silence settled. The wind rattled the branches above, sending a shower of damp leaves down onto their heads. Boudicca watched each of them, seeing the exhaustion etched in every line of their faces. She felt it herself, her limbs heavy, her heart battered by loss, yet she knew she could not let it show. She drew her cloak tighter, feeling the rough wool scrape against her neck. We are not finished. Rome thinks us broken, but we are not. We have lost a battle, not the war. Bran's jaw worked, but he said nothing. Era nodded, wiping her eyes. Isolde looked to her mother, searching for reassurance. Boudicca met her gaze and held it, pouring every ounce of strength she had left into her daughter's eyes. A distant cry sounded, a child, frightened, calling for her mother. Boudicca turned, watching as a young woman stumbled through the crowd, her arms empty, face wild with panic. Without a word, Boudicca strode toward her, boots squelching in the mud. The woman, barely more than a girl, clutched at Boudicca's arm, her fingers digging deep. My son, please, I cannot find him. Boudicca gripped her shoulders, steadying her. What is his name? Kai. He is 5. He has a scar here. She touched her cheek, voice cracking. Isolde, help me look. Together, Boudicca and her daughter moved through the survivors, calling the boy's name. The crowd parted, their faces turning with a mix of hope and dread. Every voice was a reminder of what had been lost, every child's cry, a knife in the heart. At last, Isolde spotted him, a small shivering boy huddled beneath a broken cart, his cheeks streaked The night was thick as peat, the moon a ghostly smear behind clouds the color of lead. In the tangled woods of eastern Britannia, shadows pressed in from all sides, swallowing the world in their cold embrace. The wind, sharp and restless, hissed through the naked branches, carrying the tang of damp earth and the fading smoke of distant ruin. Every breath Boudicca took was heavy with the scent of moss, blood, and the bitter memory of fire. Her body ached, old wounds throbbing, muscles stiff from days of flight, and her skin prickled beneath the rough wool of her cloak, still damp from the last icy rain. She crouched beneath the drooping limbs of an ancient yew, its needles sticky with resin, her back pressed to the coarse bark. Each heartbeat seemed to echo through her battered frame. The chill crept up from the forest floor, seeping through the soles of her boots, numbing her toes, making her shiver despite the layers she wore. A torn tunic dyed with woad, the heavy plaid of her tribe. A leather belt cracked and stained. Her copper hair, wild and tangled, clung to her cheeks, sticky with sweat and grime. All around her, the darkness pulsed with the sounds of hunted things. The distant yip of a fox, the frantic flutter of a nightjar, startled from its nest, the heavy snap of twigs beneath the cautious step of her own people as they crept through the undergrowth. Somewhere behind her, her daughters slept fitfully, curled together beneath a tattered blanket, their breathing shallow and uneven. The girls had not spoken much since the last battle. The light had drained from their eyes, replaced by a haunted vacancy that made Boudicca's heart twist with guilt and rage. She pressed her hand to her side, feeling the sticky warmth of a wound she dared not examine too closely. The Romans had cut deep, through flesh, through pride, through hope itself. The pain was a constant companion, sharp and insistent, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was still alive. Pain meant there was still work to be done. Boudicca closed her eyes, listening to the wind, the forest, the faint crackle of embers from the dying fire behind her. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and wood smoke, tinged with the iron tang of blood. She could almost taste the ash on her tongue, the memory of burning cities and broken bodies. How did it come to this, she wondered, her thoughts a tangled knot of grief and fury. Once she had stood tall before her people, a queen crowned by the gods and the will of her tribe. Once her husband's hand had been warm in hers, their daughters safe beneath the roof of their own hall. Now she was hunted, her army shattered, her home reduced to cinders, her name whispered like a curse in the mouths of Roman soldiers. Yet beneath the exhaustion and the ache, a spark still burned. She could feel it deep in her chest, a stubborn ember that refused to die. The Romans thought her finished, a ghost, a fugitive queen, a woman broken by defeat. But the land itself seemed to pulse with her anger, the trees leaning in as if to listen, the wind carrying her vow through the night. They will not have my surrender, not while I draw breath, not while my daughters live. If I must vanish, let it be on my own terms. If I must die, let it be as a queen, not a slave. She opened her eyes, blinking away the sting of tears. The moon had slipped free of the clouds for an instant, painting the clearing in silver and shadow. Her people, what few remained, moved like ghosts among the trees, silent and watchful. They looked to her, even now, for guidance, for hope, for the promise of a future that seemed to recede with every passing hour. Boudicca drew a deep breath, filling her lungs with the cold, wild air of her homeland. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down, the dread of what tomorrow might bring, but beneath it all, she was still queen wounded, yes hunted, yes but not yet conquered, not yet. Dawn crept into the world with a grudging grayness. The sky streaked with bruised purple and the faintest blush of rose. The forest floor glistened with dew, each blade of grass tipped with silver, and the air was thick with the scent of wet bark and the faint sweetness of crushed bracken. Boudicca rose stiffly, her joints protesting, and wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders. She moved quietly, careful not to wake her daughters, and stepped into the clearing where her people had gathered. There were only a handful left, warriors and elders, women with children clinging to their skirts, a few battered men with haunted eyes. Among them stood Era, the tribe's healer, her gray hair tangled and her face lined with worry, and Caradoc, a young chieftain from a neighboring tribe, whose loyalty had survived even as others fled. Era was tending to a wounded boy, her hands gentle as she tied a strip of linen around his arm. The smell of crushed herbs, bitter yarrow, and sharp pennyroyal hung in the air, mingling with the musk of sweat and fear. Caradoc stood nearby, his arms folded across his chest, his cloak muddy and torn, his sword dangling at his hip. His jaw was set, his eyes hard. Boudicca approached, her footsteps muffled by the mossy earth. Caradoc looked up first, his gaze flickering with something like hope before it hardened again. "You should rest, my queen," he said, his voice low but edged with concern. "You're bleeding still." She shook her head, the motion sending a wave of pain through her side. "There will be time for rest when the Romans are gone from our lands, not before." Era glanced up, her eyes sharp. "You cannot lead if you cannot stand, Boudicca. Let me see to your wound." Boudicca hesitated, glancing at the faces around her. They were all watching, waiting for her to falter, to show weakness. But Era's hands were gentle, her touch cool as she peeled back the edge of Boudicca's tunic, exposing the raw gash beneath the healer's fingers, probed the wound, and Boudicca bit her lip, refusing to cry out. Caradoc knelt beside them, his breath visible in the morning chill. "Word is, the Romans are hunting in pairs now. They offer silver for news of your passage, Some of the tribes are turning. Boudicca, they say the price of your head is worth more than loyalty. Boudicca's jaw clenched. Let them take their Roman silver. Let them bow and scrape for scraps. We will not. Era dabbed the wound with a cloth soaked in pungent herbs. Even so, we must be wise. If they catch us, there will be no mercy. Not for you, not for your daughters. A silence fell, heavy as the mist. Caradoc shifted, glancing at the huddled children nearby. What do you intend, my queen? We cannot run forever. The people are weary. The children are starving. Some say we should surrender. Throw ourselves on Roman mercy. Beg for a scrap of peace. Boudicca met his gaze, her eyes fierce. You know what mercy means to the Romans' chains. Humiliation, death in the arena for our warriors, slavery for our children. Is that the peace they offer? Caradoc's lips tightened. Some would rather live on their knees than die on their feet. She looked away, her hands trembling. The memory of Roman whips, the jeering crowds, the laughter as they tore away her dignity. It all burned behind her eyes. I will not wear their chains again, nor will I see my daughters dragged behind their chariots. Era pressed a fresh linen pad to the wound, her voice gentle but unyielding. There is another way, Boudicca, the old way, the way of the queens who came before. Boudicca's breath caught. She felt the eyes of her people on her, the weight of their fear and hope. The old way, death before dishonor. The last act of a queen with no kingdom, left to save Caradoc's voice, was barely more than a whisper. Is that what you want to die and leave us leaderless? Boudicca shook her head, her copper hair tumbling over her shoulders. I want freedom for my daughters, for all of us. But if the only choice left is chains or the sword, then let my death mean something. Let the Romans remember that we did not go quietly. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire and the soft sobs of a child. Era bound the wound tightly, her hands steady. You are not alone, Boudicca. Whatever you choose, we will follow. Caradoc rose, his fists clenched. If we fight to the last. If we die, the dawn broke sullen and gray over the battered fields of Britannia. The sky a low, unbroken lid of cloud that pressed down upon the land as if to smother the last embers of rebellion. The air was thick with the scent of charred wood and damp earth, remnants of the fires that had raged through the night, now reduced to blackened skeletons of huts, and the faint, acrid tang of smoke clinging to every breath. A thin mist curled along the ground, swirling around shattered chariot wheels and the broken spears that jutted from the mud like the bones of fallen beasts. Boudicca stood alone on the edge of the ruined encampment, her silhouette stark against the pale, reluctant light. Her hair, once the wild, coppery mane that had marked her as queen, hung tangled and heavy with dew, streaked with soot and the sweat of battle. The wolf-skin cloak draped over her shoulders was torn and stained, its once proud fur matted with blood and ash. Beneath it, her linen tunic clung damply to her skin, the intricate blue-woad tattoos that coiled along her arms, now smeared and fading. She drew in a slow, shuddering breath, tasting the bitterness of defeat on her tongue. The world felt muffled, every sound dulled by exhaustion and loss. The distant cawing of crows, the soft rustle of wind through the scorched grass, the faint, broken sobs of survivors somewhere behind her. Each footstep sent a jolt of pain through her legs, the bruises and cuts from yesterday's rout throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Boudicca closed her eyes and let the cold seep into her bones, grounding her in the present. Her mind was a storm of memories and regrets, the clash of swords, the roars of her warriors, the screams of the dying. She could still see the faces of her daughters, streaked with tears and defiance, clutching each other as the Roman lines closed in. She had failed them, or had she? Had she not done all that a mother and a queen could do? She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the hard thump of her heart beneath the bruises. This is not the end, she told herself, though the words felt brittle, like frost on a winter morning. We have lost the battle, but not the fire. The Romans will not forget my name. My daughters will not forget. Britannia will not forget. A gust of wind swept across the field, carrying with it the scent of iron and decay. Boudicca opened her eyes, blinking against the sting of smoke. Her gaze traveled across the ruined landscape, the blackened posts of the sacred grove, the splintered shields half buried in mud, the ragged banners trampled underfoot. Each scar was a testament to the price they had paid, and the price Rome would pay in memory. She turned slowly, her muscles stiff and aching, and began to walk back toward the center of the camp, the soles of her boots squelched in the mud, the cold seeping up through the thin leather. Every movement sent a ripple of pain through her battered body, but she forced herself onward. The survivors needed her, the dead deserved her mourning, and the living, her daughters, her people, needed her strength, even if all she could offer was the echo of the fire they had kindled together. Is this what it means to be a legend? To be remembered not for victory, but for defiance, for the willingness to stand, even when the world burns around you. A thin, reedy whistle drifted through the air, the signal of a lookout on the far edge of the camp. Boudicca's shoulders tensed, her hand instinctively dropping to the hilt of her sayax, the short blade that had never left her side. Danger was never far in these broken days. She drew herself up, spine straightening despite the pain, and strode forward into the uncertain morning, the echo of fire burning quietly in her chest. The heart of the camp was a huddle of battered souls. Warriors with bloodied bandages, elders with hollow eyes, and children clutching at the hems of their mothers' skirts. The air was thick with the mingled odors of sweat, fear, and the faint metallic tang of old wounds. Somewhere, someone was boiling water over a feeble fire, the thin steam rising like a ghost into the gray sky. Boudicca's approach drew a hush, the survivors turning to watch her with a mixture of awe and desperation. Among them stood Era, her most trusted shield sister, and Branwen, the old druidess whose white hair was streaked with soot and whose eyes still burned with a fierce, unbroken light. Era stepped forward first, her armor dented and one arm bound in a blood-stained sling. "Queen, we have counted the living. Fewer than 200 remain, and many are wounded. The Romans have pulled back, but their scouts are near." Boudicca nodded, her gaze flicking over Era's injuries. "And the dead?" Era's jaw tightened. "We cannot bury them all. Not here, not now." Branwen shuffled closer, her staff tapping softly against the ground. The air around her seemed to shimmer with the scent of herbs and old magic, sage, mugwort, and the faint sweetness of honeycomb. "We must honor them. Their spirits will wander if left unspoken for. Already the crows gather." Boudicca met Branwen's gaze, searching for wisdom in the deep lines of her face. "We have no time for rites. If we linger, Suetonius's men will find us. We must move, north, perhaps, to the forests, where the Romans fear to follow." Era's eyes flashed with anger. "And what then, Boudicca? Hide like foxes in the brambles? Is that all we have left?" A silence fell, thick as the mist that still clung to the ground. Boudicca felt the weight of every gaze, every hope and fear pressing in on her. She saw the tremble in Ira's hand, the defiance in Branwen's stance, the silent questions in the faces of her people. She drew a slow breath, letting the cold air settle her thoughts. We fight on, not with armies, but with memory, with stories. Let Rome think us broken. Let them think the fire has died. But as long as one Iceni lives, as long as our daughters remember, the fire burns. Era's lips curled in a bitter smile. Stories do not feed the hungry, nor heal the wounded. Boudicca stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on Ira's uninjured shoulder. The warmth of flesh through battered leather was a small comfort, a reminder of all they had shared. Battles fought, losses mourned, victories celebrated beneath the moon. No, but stories endure. Rome's might will fade, as all empires do. But our names, yours, mine, our daughters, will echo in the songs of those yet unborn. Branwen nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The ancestors hear you, Queen. They walk beside us still. A child's cry broke the moment, a thin, frightened wail from the edge of the camp. Boudicca turned, her heart aching at the sound. A girl of perhaps 7 stood alone, her dress torn, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She clutched a crude wooden doll, its painted face smudged almost beyond recognition. Boudicca knelt, her knees sinking into the wet earth. She reached out, palm up, and waited. The girl hesitated, then stepped forward, placing her tiny hand in Boudicca's. "Are we going to die?" Boudicca squeezed her hand gently, feeling the fragile bones beneath the grime. "Not today. Today we remember. Today we honor those who fell. Tomorrow we begin again." The girl nodded, her eyes wide and solemn. She slipped the doll into Boudicca's free hand. A small silent offering, Boudicca cradled it, feeling the rough wood, the faded paint. She pressed it to her lips, then placed it gently in the girl's arms. Era watched, her expression softening. "You give them hope. Even now." Boudicca straightened, the ache in her muscles flaring anew. "Hope is all we have left. But it is enough." Branwen stepped closer, her staff tracing patterns in the mud. "Let us sing for the dead, then. Let us give them to the wind, so that their spirits may find the other world." The survivors gathered, forming a ragged circle around Boudicca and the druidess.